San Antonio, Texas, March 6, 1836. As dawn breaks and the sound of cannon fire and gunshots fill the air, Davy Crockett and a contingent of defenders on the southwestern corner of the Alamo shoulder their rifles and unleash volley after volley into Mexican Army soldiers as they hurry to scramble up the steep wooden ladders that they have propped up against the mission walls. As Crockett reloads, men begin to fall to his left and to his right, and looking down from the top of the wall, he can see the hordes of Mexican soldiers scrambling to overtake this small mission. He and his men are vastly outnumbered, and they know that they are, in no uncertain terms, in a fight to the death. As the soldiers swarm up the ladders, cannonball after cannonball crashes into the thick adobe walls of the mission, rapidly bludgeoning a larger and larger hole for the attacking troops. Crockett, along with every one of his comrades who have spent the last few weeks defending this small former Spanish mission, has hardly slept. Many had labored into the night, fortifying weak points in their defenses by piling up stones and soil. Most have also spent the previous few hours restlessly turning under their blankets, hoping to find some rest before the coming battle. Most, however, had found little. And now, the fight is here. Soon, the shrieks of the wounded on both sides join the chorus of the horrific din of battle. Crockett now shoulders his rifle again and fires again, as do his comrades. But there is no time to mask their fire, and each man now simply does his best to fire and reload as quickly as possible. Soon, the first line of attackers begin to pour over the walls, being met by Crockett and his men, who now unleash a ferocious close-quarters attack with knives, pistols, and anything else that they can find. But the Mexican troops are themselves resigned to a vicious fight, and they wage a ferocious counterattack as what amounts to a life-or-death street fight takes place just inside the wall's parapet. Most of the men here are American citizens, who have moved to Texas in search of a better life, and who have decided to fight for Texas's right to secede from Mexico. However, contrary to popular belief, many of the defenders are, in fact, not Americans, but immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, Germany, and Denmark, as well as a number of native-born Mexicans who have sided with the Texian cause, who are known as Tejanos. But no man at the Alamo, be they American, Tejano, or Dutchman, is as well known as Davy Crockett. Even at this point in 1836, Crockett is a national celebrity, known as both a legendary hunter and frontiersman, as well as a master storyteller and a sort of backwoods statesman. In the previous decade, he has met with presidents and foreign dignitaries, attended high society parties in New York and Washington, D.C., served in the halls of Congress, and even been the subject of a Broadway play. Now, it seems that his story will end here, in the hard, dusty ground of Texas. But, of course, this is not where his story began. Crockett's legend began in the hills of what was then considered the state of Franklin, what would eventually become the state of Tennessee, in Greene County in 1786. He was born to John and Rebecca Crockett, the fourth of 5 boys and the 7th of 9 children. He had grown up on the frontier, tracking, hunting, and fishing. He had also been turned out by his father as labor in order to pay off his father's debts. He had served in the War of 1812 under Andrew Jackson, working mostly as a scout and hunter, but gaining a reputation for his skill and endurance. He had married Polly Finley in 1806, with whom he had 3 children: John Wesley Crockett, born in 1807, William Finley Crockett, born in 1809, and Margaret Finley Crockett, born in 1814. Polly would pass away in 1815, likely from complications during childbirth or some related illness. Crockett would remarry quickly, as was common for widows and widowers alike, marrying Elizabeth Patton later in 1815. With Elizabeth, who herself had 3 children from a prior marriage, he would go on to have 3 more children: Robert, Rebecca, and Matilda Crockett. Soon after remarrying, Crockett would see the first advancements in his burgeoning political career, as a consequence of his ability to captivate an audience with his simplistic but enthralling storytelling style, regaling many eager listeners with tales of his wild life on the frontier. In 1817, he was elected Justice of the Peace of Lawrence County, then Lieutenant Colonel of the local militia, and finally as a state legislator to the Tennessee House in 1821. Throughout this time, Crockett, along with thousands of other Tennessee migrants, had moved his family further and further westward to the less populated areas of the territory. Here, on the fringes of the frontier, his popularity had grown amongst his constituents as a trustworthy, plain-spoken representative who could be counted on to act in their best interests. This reputation further spurred his political rise, seeing him elected to Congress in 1827. Here, he had famously broken ranks with his former commander, now President Andrew Jackson, vehemently opposing his Indian Removal Act of 1830. His opposition to the act had been so greatly appreciated by the Cherokee people that, in January of 1831, Cherokee Chief John Ross had sent Crockett a letter expressing his gratitude for the Tennesseans' steadfast support. But this stance had also been a driving force behind losing his bid for re-election, as opposing Jackson had cost him much support in his home state, largely populated by ardent Jackson supporters. In the 1831 election, he would lose to Jacksonian politician William Fitzgerald. This, however, would not end his political career, nor his celebrity. In 1831, The Lion of the West, a loosely biographical play starring the character Nimrod Wildfire as Crockett, had been a smash hit amongst New York audiences. Crockett had even attended a performance and been given a standing ovation after being pointed out to the audience. In 1833, he would regain his office, defeating Fitzgerald and returning to Congress, where he would serve until 1835. In 1835, however, he was again defeated in his bid for re-election by another Jacksonian politician named Adam Huntsman. Growing frustrated with the fickle nature of his constituency, Crockett, who had already been exchanging letters with friends in Texas, had finally, famously declared to his fellow Tennesseans that they may all go to hell. I am going to Texas. However, in 1835, Texas was a veritable tinderbox of political upheaval and an increasingly dangerous place for Anglo-American settlers seeking to stake their claim within the burgeoning republic. The Mexican government had, until now, actually permitted relatively unfettered settlement rights to Americans seeking to build homesteads in the areas that now comprise central Texas. This, in fact, was in large part seen as a preventative measure, one that provided a sort of human buffer between the larger settlements of northern Mexico and even Mexico City itself from attack by the actual reigning power of Texas, the Comanche. But the laissez-faire nature of Mexican immigration laws had seen a radical reform in 1830 with the law of April 6, 1830, that severely restricted further Anglo incursion into the area. Special taxes and tariffs were also levied on the citizens living in Texas, further stoking their collective sense of injustice. This sense of frustration was, in fact, nothing new to the Texas frontier, as citizens of Mexico who already inhabited the area, known as Tejanos, had borne the burden of ferocious native attacks for decades, only to be largely seen as secondary concerns by their representatives in Mexico City. At the beginning of the 1830s, their sense of shared indignity had been ratcheted up even further by Mexican General San Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna's orders for Mexican troops to occupy towns in northern Mexico, including Anahuac, Velasco, and San Antonio, then known as Bejar. This had caused even more unrest amongst the local population and further solidified the shared interests and loyalties of the Anglo-Americans and Tejanos. However, one sizable point of contention between the two parties was the issue of slavery, which many of the Anglo settlers, especially those in the eastern reaches of Texas and those with roots in the Deep South, saw as an indispensable part of their culture. Though Mexico had officially abolished slavery in 1829, many of the settlers who already owned slaves failed to abide by the new policy. Many of the Tejanos were either reluctantly tolerant or tacitly disapproving of the abhorrent practice, which had never been a central aspect in their culture. Still, in the interest of gaining their independence from the Mexican government, which had failed them for so long, most of the Tejano population saw fit to overlook their disagreements. By October of 1835, tensions had erupted at the Battle of Gonzales, in which Mexican officials had demanded that the town of Gonzales surrender a pair of cannons that had been loaned to them for use in defense against the Comanche and other local tribes. The Texians, though, had refused, instead hiding the cannons until the morning of October 2nd, when they had filled them with scrap metal and met the Mexican army on the banks of the Guadalupe River under a flag that read, "Come and take it." They fired upon the Mexican soldiers, and after a brief skirmish, the Mexicans retreated, yielding the Texians an unlikely and morale-boosting victory. This skirmish effectively marked the beginning of the Texas Revolution. A week later, on October 9th, the Texans had moved to seize the Presidio La Bahia at Goliad in order to cut off the Mexican army's supplies to San Antonio. Attacking under cover of night, they had managed to seize control of the Presidio with one Texian wounded and one Mexican soldier killed. This gave the rebel Texans control over a vital strategic point and further boosted their confidence and enthusiasm, perhaps to the point of hubris. On October 28th, they had again won a decisive victory at the Battle of La Concepcion, and again in December at the Siege of Béjar, in which they had wrested control of San Antonio from Santa Anna's army and took over the city for themselves. By this point, the vast majority of Texans sensed that the victory they sought was well within reach, if not already outright assured. They took control of the old mission, known as the Alamo, and began to fortify it for use as a defensive position when Santa Anna inevitably returned with his army for one last effort to hold on to the crucially important city. For many among the roughly 200 Texans now firmly in control of San Antonio, this was an opportunity that they looked forward to, as they believed that they would not only defeat the much-hated general, but force him to surrender. By the time Davy Crockett and a band of his close friends had begun to make their way to Texas, all among them believed that they were on their way to be part of a great victory. Their main concern was simply that they might miss out on the fighting. By the time Crockett and company arrived at the Alamo, command of the Texian forces had changed hands a number of times. Original Commander Edward Burleson, who would go on to carve his own legendary reputation in Texas history, had resigned, and Francis Johnson had taken his place. Johnson had proven to be unpopular and lost confidence amongst his men after an ill-advised expeditionary trip into Mexico had left the men in San Antonio hard-pressed for ammunition and supplies for a number of weeks. James Clinton Neal had replaced Johnson in January of 1836, but had been forced to resign his position and return home after receiving word that members of his family had become critically ill. In his stead, joint command of the city and of the Alamo had fallen to two men. One was a 26-year-old Alabama lawyer who had fled severe debt in his homeland, leaving his wife and two young children, and moved to Mexican-held Texas. He had quickly become politically involved, gaining local renown as a firebrand revolutionary and immovable supporter of Texas's independence. His name was Colonel William B. Travis. The other was a 42-year-old frontiersman, entrepreneur, and real estate speculator of questionable repute. He was, in fact, a celebrity himself, though of a more regional nature than Crockett. He had gained his renown after a knife fight on a small island on the Mississippi River in 1827, in which he had used a massive knife given to him by his brother to eviscerate his opponent in a brawl over a duel. Though he had been wounded several times himself, his name had both risen to that of a frontier legend and given birth to one of the Old West's most famous weapons. In the preceding months, he had also, tragically, become stricken with a deadly illness, most likely typhoid pneumonia. Despite all of his repute, it was evident to himself and to all who saw him that he was a man quickly succumbing to his ailments. His name was Jim Bowie. When Davy Crockett and his contingent of roughly 30 volunteers arrived at the Alamo on February 8th of 1836, he was met and warmly welcomed by Bowie and Travis. It had seemed to all three of the men that victory for Texas was surely at hand. But over the following 2 weeks, the situation had rapidly deteriorated. Even as Crockett had been making his way south to Texas, General Santa Anna, fuming at having been forced to cede control of San Antonio to the Texians, was already on a march north from Mexico City with thousands of troops. A polarizing figure in his home country, Santa Anna believes that his tenuous hold on his power in Mexico cannot withstand the shame of a defeat against the ragtag militias of Texas. With this in mind, he had pushed his army to return to San Antonio as quickly as possible in order to retake the city and beat the Texians into submission. On February 23rd, only 2 weeks after Crockett's arrival, sentries inside the Alamo had spotted Mexican cavalry in the hills near San Antonio. This stunned the Texians within the city, as none could believe that Santa Anna and his troops had been able to make their return so quickly. Now, roughly 1,500 to 1,800 Mexican troops surrounded their force of roughly 180 men. For Crockett, Bowie, Travis, and the rest of the defenders at the Alamo, it had been made immediately clear that the fight had been brought to their doorstep, and that they would have to make their stand much sooner than they had anticipated. Travis and Bowie had ordered every Texan in San Antonio to immediately make their way to the Alamo, their only refuge within the entire city. The rebels had been caught off guard, and Santa Anna knew it. The Mexican army had quickly taken control of the city and surrounded the Alamo, trapping the defenders within its walls. For their parts, the Texians, several of them with their wives and children, were now cut off from escape and in dire need of reinforcements. For 13 torturous days, the Mexican army had laid siege to the Alamo, incessantly pounding the main adobe-walled building with artillery and destroying the wooden walls that encompassed the compound. Throughout the siege, Santa Anna had sent several envoys to negotiate for the Texian surrender, but all had been soundly refused by the defenders. On February 24th, the second day of the siege, Colonel Travis had written a letter, sent out by way of Captain Albert Martin, who volunteered for the incredibly dangerous task of skulking out of the city at night and delivering the letter 75 miles east to his hometown of Gonzales, Texas. The letter, pleading for help from his leadership, but resolved to fight to the end, read as follows: "I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna, and I shall never surrender or retreat. Then I call on you, in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and of everything dear to the American character, to come to our aid, victory or death." Though Captain Martin and 31 other intrepid men from Gonzales would actually make their way into the Alamo in an effort to provide reinforcements, their number was but a fraction of that Travis had hoped for. On the same day that Travis had sent his letter, General Santa Anna had ordered the black flag of no quarter raised above his headquarters, signaling to the Texians that none of them would be spared should they fail to surrender. While Travis may or may not have drawn a line in the sand with his sword and asked all of those willing to give their lives to step over the line in a symbol of their resolve, it was quite clear to Crockett and all of his fellow defenders that all of those who did not surrender to the Mexican army would pay with their lives. But save for Lewis Rose, the one man who chose to escape with his life, the men inside the Alamo all chose to remain and pay the ultimate price. Now, after laying siege to the Alamo compound for 2 weeks, Santa Anna has ordered the attack that is now flooding inside the walls of the former mission. Within minutes, Colonel Travis, defending the north side of the compound, is shot dead with a musket ball through the forehead. Meanwhile, Jim Bowie lies inside a small room, bedridden and so stricken by his illness that the famous frontier fighter is unable to even stand, much less present any kind of resistance. As the battle rages outside, Mexican soldiers barge into the room where Bowie lies and quickly put an end to his storied life with their bayonets. Meanwhile, Crockett, one of the few remaining combatants towards the latter stages of the fight, continues to pour fire into the attacking soldiers until he is run entirely out of ammunition. At this point, he and his fellow defenders use their rifles as clubs and slash and stab with their large hunting knives, using anything at their disposal to fight to the bitter end, as all among them know that these are their last moments. Crockett, as well, will meet his end on this bloody morning. However, it is not entirely clear exactly how he was killed. Some accounts hold that Crockett was shot and killed in the latter stages of the battle, while others say he and a small number of defenders who were left alive were actually taken prisoner and summarily executed under the watchful eye of General Santa Anna. While his exact cause of death is unknown, the ultimate fate of the Alamo defenders will be the same for all of them. The bodies of the dead men, who had only hours earlier stirred inside the compound walls, are laboriously stacked into piles by the Mexican troops and then lit on fire, denying them all both funerals and proper graves. But while the Battle of the Alamo had ended in a resounding defeat for the Texians, their resolve and willingness to give their all would soon give birth to a renewed fury amongst their countrymen. While General Santa Anna had expected that his victory would result in breaking the will of the Texians, he would soon be horrified when it in fact produced the opposite result. Instead of inducing surrender, the example of the Alamo defenders would soon renew the fury of the rebels, resulting in several key defeats for the Mexican army, all while cries of "Remember the Alamo" resounded about the battlefield. With his ultimate defeat at the Battle of San Jacinto in April of 1836, Santa Anna would be forced into surrender, and Texas would gain its ultimate independence from Mexico. But without the sacrifice of the men at the Alamo, this victory may very well have never have occurred. Though certainly imperfect men, the names of Bowie, Travis, and, perhaps more than any, Davy Crockett will forever be remembered as examples of full devotion to a cause, even at the cost of one's own life. In modernity, Crockett has gone on to become known in American culture as a sort of pop culture figure, one who was born on a mountaintop in Tennessee and killed himself a bar when he was only 3. But the truth behind the man is, arguably, far more unbelievable and far more consequential than even contemporary lore has given him credit for. But the many stories of the frontier exploits of Davy Crockett, from the hunting of the Tennessee woods to his service in the Creek War, as well as the countless other instances that have been overlooked by mainstream history outlets, are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Northern Texas, June 27, 1874. In the middle of the night, in the tiny settlement known as Adobe Walls, James Hanrahan stands outside of the sod-roof saloon that he owns and operates. Hanrahan is alone, cloaked in the darkness of the night, and clutching a revolver. He is visibly nervous and exhausted from lack of sleep, and, more than anything, he wishes he could go inside, pour himself a stiff drink, and drift off to sleep until dawn brings on the repressive heat of yet another blazing Texas summer day. But he knows he cannot. Hanrahan knows what he must do. He aims the pistol into the air and squeezes the trigger. The tiny settlement, comprised of only 4 buildings, is soon suddenly awash in activity as the remaining 27 men present, who are mostly recent arrivals, tired after their long journeys, are snapped out of their long-awaited slumbers to the report of the pistol. The shot sails harmlessly skyward as Hanrahan hurries back into his saloon and tucks the weapon away. As the small crowd of inhabitants who are making Adobe Walls their temporary home gather outside, questioning what the source of the loud noise was, Hanrahan stumbles back out of his sod-roof establishment, breathlessly informing them that the noise has come from the cracking of a ridgepole that holds up the heavy roof of his building. This, if it is true, is a serious problem. This is a relatively common occurrence in the Old West, and the men know that a cracked ridgepole will have to be taken out and replaced immediately. As compensation for their efforts, the bartender offers up free drinks for all those pitching in to help. As the hours drag by and the men labor and drink, Hanrahan continually casts nervous glances at the door. He knows the ridgepole is not, in fact, cracked. But he knows that in the dimly lit building, in the middle of the night, it will be difficult for even experienced repairmen to spot a small crack in the sizable ridgepole. Hanrahan's intentions are not to oversee any actual repairs, but to simply keep the men encamped here at Adobe Walls awake. He has received reports in the preceding days from informants that he keeps in the territory of a large war party gathering nearby, and, not wanting to drive away business, he has chosen not to share the reports with anyone else present. Out here on the open plains of North Texas, reliable patronage is such a rarity that withholding news of an attack in order to ensure a steady flow of income is simply the cost of doing business. Aiding in Hanrahan's self-justification is the fact that his clientele are not exemplary of the typical American citizen at the time. Even amongst the rebellious and rowdy population of Texas, the regulars who indulge themselves in gambling and hard liquor at this establishment are rare in their capacity to endure danger and violence. His clientele, and the bulk of the not quite 30-strong population of Adobe Walls, is mostly comprised of buffalo hunters and skinners, otherwise known as hidemen. They are an unusually hardened and hardy lot, born from the boom in demand for buffalo hide. This boom has come after enterprising tanners on the East Coast developed a way to soften the hide that manufacturers found suitable and in many ways ideal for making everything from boots to coats to the leather straps used in the machinery now becoming ubiquitous in major urban centers with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. The buffalo hunters, who had once been employed by local army forts to harvest the mighty beasts for their meat to feed the troops, have, over the last several years, blossomed their grisly trade into its own industrialized operation. Their quarry, the imposing American bison, colloquially known as buffalo, present not only an enticing target, but an easy one for hunters familiar with their habits. The hulking animals cluster in large herds and do not flee until the lead animal among them is shot down. Over the course of the decades spanning from 1870 to 1880, the buffalo population of North America was utterly decimated. In 1870, there was thought to be more than 12 million buffalo roaming the plains. By 1880, there will be fewer than 400,000. After the animals are killed, the teams of men set about the tedious, tiresome, and outright filthy task of skinning the massive animals and then salting and harvesting the animals' tongues, which are prized delicacies in the cities on the eastern seaboard and in Europe. The carcasses are then left to rot by the thousands on the open expanses of the sun-soaked plains. This practice had increased in both pace and scope, beginning in the territory of Kansas and rapidly expanding southward and westward into the territory belonging to tribes like the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. By this point in the mid-1870s, these once powerful tribes that have forfeited large swaths of their territory to the United States government are finding themselves in increasingly dire straits. As their territorial domain recedes, and the once expansive herds of buffalo are reduced exponentially year after year, the tribes of the central and southern plains are becoming increasingly angry and increasingly desperate. Their ire is drawn, in particular, by the teams of buffalo hunters who roam their lands and cut down the animals that they depend on almost entirely for their survival. In this area of northern Texas, the Comanche have been hit particularly hard. Though they are still the most powerful tribe on the southern plains, their numbers have been decimated by outbreaks of dysentery, smallpox, and cholera over the preceding few decades. Though once a mighty Spartan-like culture, nearly devoid of formalized religious practices, they have recently begun to adopt an odd and rather ad hoc adaptation of the sun dance, a ritual performed by tribes with more developed religious practices like the Kiowa and the Cheyenne. They have spent much of the past few years being perpetually pursued by the U.S. Army and intermittently wreaking havoc on Texan and Mexican settlements as they struggled to regain from the ravages of the white man's diseases. Though they are still feared throughout the whole of Texas, the Comanche people know that they are, as a whole, ailing. Thus, many among them have sought solace in medicine men, who claim to have spiritual solutions to the Comanche's temporal problems. Foremost among them is a 23-year-old, heavy-set, and broad-faced man named Isatai. Though he is not a warrior, nor does he have any experience at all in tactics or strategy or logistics, he has managed to convince the struggling and weary Comanche people that he is in possession of a great power. Throughout the spring of 1874, he had begun to foster his own legend. Comanche camps from all over the southern plains began to buzz with tales of this powerful young medicine man who, it was said, could stop bullets by casting spells, could actually fly into the sun to spend time with the spirits of the other world, and who could belch up literal wagon loads full of bullets to supply the Comanche in their fight against the whites. Now was the time, Isatai had insisted as he traveled from camp to camp, for the Comanche to rise up, to join with their allies in the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho, and to finally, once and for all, drive the American invaders from their lands. Though many amongst the Comanche would likely have dismissed the young Isatai out of hand were he traveling alone, it is his close friend, the legendary warrior Quanah Parker, whose endorsement lends great credence to his claims. Quanah, the half-white son of captured Texan Cynthia Ann Parker and the Comanche chief Pettinacona, had risen to prominence as a respected warrior and a leader after being effectively orphaned when his father had been killed and his mother recaptured by the Texans in a raid a decade prior. Now, his opinions hold great sway amongst his people. In May of 1874, when the Comanche bands all gathered on the Red River for their attempt at a sun dance, Quanah and Isatai, beseeched their ailing people to listen to their cries for an uprising and to follow them into the fight. Isatai had promised to make the warriors invincible and render the Texans they planned to attack completely helpless with his powerful magic. They had managed to recruit warriors from their allies in the Kiowa and the Cheyenne and the Arapaho, and now, after much speech-giving and testimony, they convinced many of their fellow Comanche to come on the warpath. Estimates place the size of their total force at between 250 and 1,000 warriors, with most experts erring towards the lower end of those numbers. In either case, with their band of warriors now in tow, Isatai and Quanah had the force that they had long dreamed of. They consulted with chiefs from all of the tribes, and it was a near universal conclusion amongst them that the biggest single problem facing the tribes of the southern plains at the moment was that of the buffalo hunters. Their incessant slaughter of the lifeblood of the tribes must be stopped at any cost. And so, the war party, after much secretive preparation, now makes their way towards Adobe Walls, the headquarters of the buffalo trade in North Texas. Meanwhile, as the intertribal force of warriors make their final preparations for battle and then ride out towards Adobe Walls from across the plains, the buffalo hunters inside Hanrahan's sod-roof saloon are just finishing their laborious task of replacing the supposedly cracked ridgepole of the ramshackle building. They have been thoroughly plied with whiskey for their efforts, and many among them are ready to return to their bedrolls for some much-needed sleep. But Hanrahan, ever watchful of the eastern horizon as he awaits the sunrise, insists that they continue to stay and drink, free of charge, as a means of thanking them for their assistance. He intends to keep them awake until the impending attack finally comes, and hopes that their senses are not too dulled by alcohol to fight off their attackers. Finally, at around 4 a.m., the party of Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, led by Isatai and Quanah, arrive atop the ridgeline overlooking Adobe Walls. Isatai is completely naked and painted head to toe in yellow, the color of invincibility. Many of the warriors, as well as their horses, are also completely covered in yellow paint. 10 years earlier, in 1864, the legendary mountain man Kit Carson had led a U.S. Army contingent in search of Comanche raiders in a battle that had occurred in the adobe ruins that gave the place its name, which lie about a mile away from where the buffalo hunters now make their homes. Carson and his men had seen a sight eerily similar to this, and it was only through Carson's inexorable leadership and coolness under fire that he and his men were able to survive. But the buffalo hunters here on this day in 1874 not only lack discipline and leadership, they are also largely half-drunk on rot-gut whiskey, and most have been kept up all night performing hard physical labor. They are, in short, in less than ideal condition to fight a pitched battle against a highly experienced and incredibly motivated attacking force. However, these hunters do have one thing that their countrymen serving in the U.S. Army a decade earlier did not: the Sharps buffalo rifle. The imposing firepower possessed by the weapon, combined with the experience and combative nature of the buffalo hunters, will now prove to be their only hope of survival in the fight to come. As the morning sun begins to crest the eastern horizon, the imposing force of native warriors, with the exception of Isatai and a few select elders, charges down the hill, sweeping down upon the small settlement with startling skill, speed, and ferocity. William Dixon, better known as Billy Dixon, a 23-year-old buffalo hunter who had come to Adobe Walls from Leavenworth, Kansas, by way of West Virginia, gives the following account of the initial morning charge. There was never a more splendidly barbaric sight. In after years, I was glad that I had seen it. Hundreds of warriors, the flower of the fighting men of the southwestern plains tribes, mounted upon their finest horses, armed with guns and lances and carrying heavy shields of thick buffalo hide, were coming like the wind. Over all was splashed the rich colors of red, vermilion, and ochre on the bodies of the men and on the bodies of the running horses. Scalps dangled from their bridles, gorgeous war bonnets fluttered their plumes, bright feathers dangled from the tails and manes of the horses, and the bronzed, half-naked bodies of the riders glittered with ornaments of silver and brass. Behind this headlong charge stretched the plains, on whose horizon the rising sun was lifting its morning fires. The warriors seemed to emerge from this glowing background. The cry goes up amongst the buffalo hunters that an attack is fast approaching, and all those who are awake race to grab their weapons and barricade themselves inside of the adobe walled buildings. The walls are 2 feet thick, providing ample cover even from native rifle fire. However, outnumbered by at least 20 to 1, the buffalo hunters are well aware of their current predicament. They are also well aware of the vitriol the Plains tribes carry for them, and they know that the only thing worse than being killed would be to be captured alive by the Comanche and their allies. The tales of the unthinkable tortures wrought upon prisoners of war had circulated on the frontier for decades, and now those stories helped to steel the resolve of the buffalo hunters. But the attack happens in a flash, leaving 2 buffalo hunters, the Shadler brothers, who had been asleep in one of the covered wagons, stranded away from the cover of the adobe structures. They are quickly cut down, their pitiable cries drowned out in the din of gunfire and war cries. Their beloved dog, a large, sweet-natured Newfoundland, is also shot down in his efforts to defend his masters. All 3 are scalped. The attack roars on, and in a matter of moments it is within range of the adobe buildings. Another resident of Adobe Walls, a man named Billy Tyler, is shot through the lungs as he attempts to rush into one of the buildings in a futile dash for safety. The fight continues on, with the attacking tribesmen whirling in a cyclone of violence around the defenders who are now ensconced in the buildings, as they desperately fire out of the portholes cut into the walls. Quanah Parker, in the lead of the furious attack, attempts to batter down the door of Hanrahan's saloon by backing his horse up to the door and attempting to use the animal's powerful legs to kick it down. After a number of earnest attempts, though, the young warrior and fearless leader is forced to abandon his ploy in the midst of gunfire pouring out from the buffalo hunters inside. Now the warriors attempt to set fire to the buildings, but the adobe walls and sod roofs make poor fuel for the flames, and the attackers are unable to accomplish much in the way of consequential damage. Finally, after suffering heavy initial losses at the hands of the buffalo hunters and their powerful rifles, a fate that they had been assured was impossible by the medicine man Isatai, the attacking native forces pulled back to regroup on the northern ridge. For the rest of the day, intermittent attacks rained down upon the besieged defenders. But time and again, the warriors are repelled, much to their confusion and consternation. Then, the attacks drag on into a second day. In between defending against charges, the defenders do their best to bury not only their dead, but veritable heaps of their own horses and oxen that the native warriors have killed in frustration when they are unable to breach the defenses of their human targets. However, more hope for the buffalo hunters comes in the way of reinforcements, when 2 more hunters come into the camp from the surrounding area. One of these men is sent out to ride to Dodge City for reinforcements, leaving the total number of the defending force at 30. Still, despite their disadvantages in mobility, numbers, and position, the buffalo hunters are able to stop the native forces from overrunning them. The attack continues on for a 3rd day, and a number of frustrated warriors, along with Isatai, congregate on a hill that later estimates gauge to be between 1,000 to 1,500 yards away from Hanrahan's saloon. The warriors and the medicine men sit atop their horses, presumably well outside of rifle range even for the powerful buffalo guns, and quarrel over what to do next, and over who is to blame for their difficulties so far. Isatai, doing his best to defend himself against his comrades' accusations of fraud and cowardice, claims that the Cheyenne had killed and eaten a skunk on the eve of their attack, effectively nullifying Isatai's medicine. As the group of tribesmen squabbles amongst themselves, Billy Dixon, the 23-year-old hunter who, despite his youth, has already built a considerable reputation for himself as a crack shot, eyes them from nearly a mile away while standing in the doorway of Hanrahan's saloon. After a few moments of sizing up the distance and condition, Dixon takes up his rifle and braces himself against the door jamb. "I was admittedly a good marksman," Dixon would later recall, yet this was a shot that one might call a scratch shot, meaning that, essentially, he simply aims as best he can and hopes for the most effective shot possible. Seconds after Dixon squeezes the trigger of his Sharps rifle, one of the native horsemen in the group berating Isatai suddenly slumps over and falls to the ground lifeless. Dixon's shot has, miraculously, struck one of the warriors from a distance thought by nearly everyone, including Dixon himself, to be impossible. The group on the hill scatters instantaneously, having incurred yet another fatality, and now with their nerves irreparably shaken. Still, throughout the day, more attacks are made, with Quanah Parker marveling many of the buffalo hunters with his strength and martial prowess, as he fearlessly charges again and again, and even manages to lift a wounded comrade off the ground with one hand while sitting atop his horse. Finally, Quanah's horse is shot out from under him at a distance of nearly 500 yards. He takes cover behind a hulking, rotting buffalo carcass, only to receive a bullet wound of his own between his neck and right shoulder blade. Ultimately, he is able to escape to safety, and while his wound will prove to be largely superficial, the damage that has been incurred by his forces is rapidly becoming unmanageable. The once prophetic Isatai now has no answers, and as dissension grows amongst the ranks of the Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, more buffalo hunters from the surrounding area pour into Adobe Walls to assist their buffalo hunter brethren. Several of the more experienced, older chiefs berate Isatai for causing such losses, beating him about the head and torso with their riding quirts. Though he can provide no solutions, and still refuses to ride forth and fight the hunters himself, Isatai maintains his innocence. Soon, though, the native forces are rife with division and discouragement, and on the fourth day, they disappear into the expanse of the plains. After fighting for their lives for the better part of a week, the defenders holed up inside the buildings at Adobe Walls are elated. By August of that year, more than a month after the battle, a troop of cavalry arrived to Adobe Walls to find a dozen buffalo hunters still resolutely surviving in the remote outpost. Outside the saloon, each impaled on a post, are the skulls of several vanquished warriors. But the Americans' fight for expansion, and the tribe's fight for survival, will not end here. Though Isatai will go on to be held in great contempt by his people, Quanah Parker will become a seminal figure in the tribe's history, and a pivotal force in leading the Comanche forward in their new way of life into the 20th century. Billy Dixon, the hunter who made the nearly impossible shot at Adobe Walls, will go on to be awarded the Medal of Honor as a civilian for his actions in a fight against the Comanche and Kiowa only months after this battle at Adobe Walls. Also present at the fight is a young 20-year-old hunter and skinner named Bat Masterson, who will go on to become one of the Old West's most legendary figures, serving with the likes of Wyatt Earp, and even going on to work as a newspaper correspondent in his later years. The Second Battle of Adobe Walls will shape the lives of virtually all those who fought there and managed to, somehow, survive. It was also a pivotal moment in the history of the Old West, as it will, unofficially, mark the beginning of the end for the way of life of the tribes living on the plains. Never again would the buffalo range in such numbers, and never again would tribes like the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho roam with such freedom. The tribes present at Adobe Walls will all go on to carry out retributive raids on homesteads and farms from Mexico to Colorado, though never again would they hold martial superiority over their homelands. But the accounts of those many raids, as well as the many tales of the remarkable lives of figures such as Quanah Parker, Billy Dixon, and Bat Masterson, are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Northern Texas, September 28, 1874, 5 a.m. In the eerie dark of the pre-dawn morning, the men of the U.S. Army's 4th Cavalry and their horses nervously peer down a nearly vertical embankment. Then, after a few tense moments, the riders dismount and lead their horses over the edge, the angle being so steep that the animals' hind legs nearly touch their stomachs. In the darkness, the men cannot even see the bottom of the embankment, but can only trust in the orders of their officers and resolve themselves to complete this seemingly impossible task. And, as every one of them well knows, this will be only the first of many such tasks that will be asked of them on this day. For they are under the command of one of the Army's most promising, most aggressive, and most demanding young leaders, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie. And Mackenzie has been charged with completing a mission that has plagued the U.S. Army for decades, finding and defeating the Comanche. This has been made even more difficult by the fact that this band of Comanches they are searching for have joined forces with their longtime allies the Kiowa and their new allies the Cheyenne and Arapaho in order to evade and resist Mackenzie. And, finally, to make all of this even more complex, Mackenzie would have to find them in the midst of the labyrinthian confines of Texas's massive Palo Duro Canyon. But after weeks of searching with his Tonkawa native scouts, Mackenzie has finally located the village of the Comanche and their allies, and now he seeks to make his attack. Time is of the essence, and Mackenzie drives his men hard. This is nothing new to them, as it is well known that their commander is not only a strict disciplinarian, but absolutely unrelenting in his pursuit of his enemy. Though his irascible reputation is well-accepted fact amongst his men, it is also well accepted that his bravery is indisputable. Mackenzie, born to a prominent naval family that included legendary naval officer Commodore Matthew C. Perry, graduated first academically in his class at West Point. Graduating in 1862, his class was among the first newly minted officers to see combat in the Civil War. And, for his part, Ranald Mackenzie saw some of the most violent, brutal fighting in the entirety of the war. He distinguished himself in some of the Civil War's deadliest battles, including the Second Battle of Bull Run, the Battle of Antietam, and the Battle of Gettysburg. By war's end, Mackenzie would be seriously wounded a staggering 7 times. Now, nearly a decade later, his body bore testament to what he had endured, with his right hand being so severely mangled that the Comanche had taken to calling him Bad Hand. It was also increasingly rumored amongst his men and commanders alike that Mackenzie's mind may also bear the scars of the horrors he had survived, as his behavior was becoming increasingly more volatile and erratic. Still, at this time, he is considered one of the most revered combat officers in the whole of the United States Army, and has been entrusted with this task of hunting down the Comanche and their allies for good reason, as there are few men more qualified for the job. After ascertaining the location of the Comanche camp, Mackenzie has ordered an attack at first light. He knows, as do all of his men, that the element of surprise will be critical. If the Comanche and their allies detect their presence, they will simply meld into the canyon's infinite confines and carry on to fight another day. As far as Mackenzie is concerned, this is a wholly unacceptable option. And, thus, his men continue to pour down the impossibly steep incline before congregating at the bottom on the canyon floor. Many of them have found the descent more terrifying than any battle they have yet fought, and struggle to regain control of their nerves before the upcoming attack. Now, it is just before 6 a.m., and Mackenzie's native scouts point out the direction of the village. This large village has gone undetected to virtually everyone but the Tonkawa scouts. However, it is only roughly 1 mile away. The soldiers continue to lead their horses over the rocky ground of the canyon floor, deliberately moving towards the village with the Tonkawa scouts leading the way. The trek is slow and cautious, and it is nearly 7 a.m. before the soldiers are within striking distance of the village. Even at this range, miraculously, the inhabitants of the village still have seemingly no idea that the cavalry is present. With every step closer to the village, Mackenzie and his men are more and more heartened at the fact that they have managed to get so close, still completely unnoticed. Then, just as the sun begins to peek over the canyon walls, the sharp retort of barking dogs cuts through the morning air. The army soldiers have been discovered. Only a few short moments after the first dog begins to sound the alert to his masters, the entire village seemingly explodes into a fury of activity, with mothers and children bursting out of their lodges and running for the confines of the canyon. Now, Mackenzie orders his men to mount a head-on attack into the village, hoping to strike when the Comanches and their allies are at their weakest. This village, Mackenzie well knows, is under the leadership of some of the fiercest, most legendary chiefs of the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho, ones that he has spent years pursuing, such as Lone Wolf, Poor Buffalo, and Quanah Parker. The warriors here will likely be more concerned with defending their families than mounting offensive attacks. But they are largely highly capable, very experienced warriors. The soldiers' best chance for success lies in striking the village hard and hitting it immediately. But as the men charge into the village, they are met by relatively few defenders, ones seemingly intent on creating a distraction for their escaping comrades more than mounting a serious defensive stand. This, however, does not diminish the ferocity of the soldiers' charge. And it especially does not affect those at the forefront of the attack, the Tonkawa scouts. The sight of the oncoming Tonkawa perhaps causes more terror in the hearts of the Comanche mothers than does that of the oncoming soldiers. In the decades-long intertribal warfare between the Comanche and the Tonkawa, there have been countless instances in which entire villages of both sides have been slaughtered. Thus, virtually every woman and child in the village now flees in terror, as their warriors still defending the village begin to fall. For all of the fighting spirit of the warriors on the canyon floor attempting to fight off the soldiers and scouts, they are quickly overrun. By 9 a.m., the fighting is over, and roughly 60 defenders lie dead on the ground. But the vast majority of the Comanche have managed to escape further into the canyon under the leadership of their chiefs. Quanah Parker, in particular, stands out as an unshakable leader during the Comanche's retreat, guiding his people to safety and away from the chaos and danger of the battle site. But for all of Quanah's vaunted leadership, he and his people face one seemingly intractable problem. They are all now on foot. The Comanche's entire way of life is based around the horse. They are perhaps the finest horsemen on the plains, and far and away the richest tribe in terms of pure horseflesh. But now, virtually the entirety of their 1,000+ head of horses lie under the control of Colonel Ranald Mackenzie and the 4th Cavalry. And while it might seem that the sudden influx of such a number of horses would be an unmitigated blessing to an Army cavalry officer, the newly gotten horse herd presents a sizable problem. Mackenzie's forces number roughly 400 men, with feed and supplies for several hundred horses, but no more. Thus, taking the entire herd with them would be virtually impossible. Turning them loose would also be a problem, as most would likely soon be recaptured by the Comanche. This would instantly negate any advantage Mackenzie had just gained, and again make the Comanche and their allies a viable threat across the southern plains. But in the midst of such a dilemma, Mackenzie sees great possibility. No force in Army history has been in such a position to issue such a devastating blow to the Comanche by depriving them of their most critical resource. And so, he issues a command that will haunt his legacy forever. He orders that the troopers select a small number, estimates range from 300 to 400, of the best, most suitable horses for cavalry use. Then, he orders the rest, over 1,000 horses, to be shot. For the following hours, nearly until sundown, the cavalry soldiers herd the horses into smaller ravines branching off from the main canyon and summarily annihilate them. Many of the men find themselves deeply horrified by the order, and contemporary accounts gravely remark on haunting memories of gunfire and horse screams echoing about the canyon walls in a macabre symphony. By nightfall, the deed is done, and Mackenzie, for his part, seems pleased that his orders have been carried out. It seems now, to the veteran officer, that the days of the Comanche and their allies on the open plains are numbered. He knows that without their horses, they will be all but helpless. But the Comanche will not surrender immediately. Under Quanah Parker's leadership, they will flee even further into the confines of the canyon, evading Army incursions throughout the fall. But the coming winter of 1874 to 1875 would prove to be one of the harshest in decades, and little by little, many Comanche trickled into the nearest fort, Fort Sill, in order to simply survive. In fact, it would not be until the summer of 1875 that Quanah Parker would lead his band of the final remaining holdouts into Fort Sill, officially surrendering to U.S. Army forces and resigning themselves to life on the reservation. However, while this new lifestyle was devastating to many of the Comanche and to other Plains tribes, Quanah Parker, himself the half-white child of a revered Comanche chief, would adapt well and largely thrive in his new life. He would work for the equitable treatment of his tribe, become a successful businessman, and the owner of an expansive homestead in Oklahoma known as Star House, where he would host such esteemed guests as Geronimo and Teddy Roosevelt. He would become a transitional figure, a warrior of the plains who was now the proud owner of a 1900s luxury car. He would ultimately die in 1911 at the age of 62, his life becoming the stuff of Old West legend. Sadly, for Colonel Ranald Mackenzie, he would meet a far different end. After his exploits in the Palo Duro Canyon, his already formidable reputation quickly rose to him being considered the finest field officer on the entirety of the American frontier. In 1876 to 1877, he would be called north by the army to combat the Utes and the Lakotas in other successful campaigns. And by 1882, he was held in such high esteem that he was promoted to brigadier general at the age of 42, making him one of the youngest men to ever hold the rank. He was then given command of the entire jurisdiction of Texas, a massive responsibility, and a clear indication of the faith which his commanding officers had in him. However, by the early 1880s, his symptoms of physical and mental decline were also becoming more and more evident. In addition to his numerous wounds suffered throughout the Civil War, he had also suffered several concussions while in service on the frontier. By 1883 and into 1884, his condition was beginning to severely affect his job performance. Incidents of his issuing contradictory orders, suffering violent mood swings, and being unable to focus and then falling into periods of paranoia and despair were reported by several contemporary sources, and by mid-1884, Mackenzie was officially declared unfit to serve and forced into retirement. Varying accounts point to the root cause being epilepsy, brain damage, or perhaps deterioration from a long-suffering syphilis infection. Whatever the cause, after his discharge, Mackenzie was brought home to New York by his family and placed into an asylum on Staten Island, New York. Here, he would spend his final years falling into a state of deeper and deeper disconnection from reality before finally passing away in 1889 at the age of only 48, with the cause of death being listed as dementia. Mackenzie would be laid to rest in the West Point Cemetery, fittingly interred where his journey had begun. Ranald Mackenzie presents one of the most complex, ruthless, and tragic figures in the history of the Old West, one whose impact on history is rivaled by few others. But for all of his military accomplishments, it is his ordering of the slaughter of the horses at Palo Duro Canyon that has left the most indelible mark on his legacy. It also deeply influenced Comanche culture, viewed even today as a great tragedy not only physically, but spiritually, as the horse is held in great reverence by the culture who depended on it so greatly for their survival. Depending on who you ask, the tragedy may have left an indelible mark on the location of the village itself, as many accounts claim the hoofbeats and whinnies of the massacred herd can still be heard on quiet nights even today. However, no matter how horrifying, this story is but one instance of the inhumanity and brutality that riddle the history of the Red River War. The accounts of brutal combat between the U.S. Army and the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho are virtually endless, and all deserve their own episode. But for tonight, those are other stories for other times. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the join button down below. Also, be sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram and subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.